Hello, welcome to Real Herbalism Radio, show 212, recorded live in Eugene, Oregon. Today's show is...
This show is made possible in part by the support of the Herbal Nerd Society. Patrick?
You can join the Herbal Nerd Society and be one of those great people that help us by going to thepracticalherbalist.com, clicking on the tab at the top that says Join the Herbal Nerd Society, fill out the little form, and make a little payment, and you are set.
And we thank you very much for your support. Hold us there.
Aromatherapy is the practice of using scent to heal a multitude of conditions. For herbalists, the scent of the plants, like the scent of a place, anchors deep healing. Today we're talking with Jessica Baker, licensed acupuncturist, herbalist, and author of plant songs about aromatherapy formulation. Now here are your hosts, Candace Hunter and Sue Lupe.
I'm Candace Hunter.
And I'm Sue Lupe. And welcome to Real Herbalism Radio.
Welcome back, Jessica.
Thanks for having me again, ladies. And Patrick.
Ladies and Patrick.
You're welcome. No one's ever thanked me before.
Oh,
Really? No one's ever thanked you before?
Nope.
I'm upset with everybody else on the show right now.
Well, they were probably thinking thankful thoughts.
Okay.
Yeah, whether they were or not.
Yeah. So you're let's talk about aromatherapy. Now you have lots of things that you do with your practice. I think we should back up a little bit and tell people, can you give a little introduction about yourself as a practitioner, and then talk about some of the other artistic projects you do, so people have, if they missed your first show, to see what you're doing at this stage in the game.
So I am an acupuncturist and an herbalist, and I also work with tuning forks. We talked about acutonics a little bit in the last episode, and I also have videos on my YouTube channel that you can find if you just Google my name and put herbalist behind it. And then also I have a blog and a podcast called the Herb Walk Podcast. And the Herb Walk with Jessica Baker. I'm not sure what it shows up on Google, but I'm sure you can find it either way. And one thing we really didn't talk about last time was also, I'm an aromatherapist, and I've been studying aromatherapy almost as long as I've been studying herbalism. 20 plus years ago, when at least with my teacher, Jane Bothwell, we learned aromatherapy along with herbalism. So when we would make salves, she would talk about lavender essential oil, and it was always like a couple of drops of this and that. It's not the same thing as I feel like aromatherapy or essential oils, how they're used more on a mainstream today. There was no separation. Aromatherapy and herbalism were like one thing, and you used aromatic plants. Mm-hmm. As much as you would use, a bitter herb, you were using aromatic herbs to promote change, just like you would any other herbal medicine. And then with Chinese medicine, aromatic plants are a huge part of Chinese medicine to elicit change, not only in the body, but also in the spirit. And so to me, aromatherapy is herbalism, and that's why I forget to even say I'm an aromatherapist, because to me, just being an herbalist implies that in some way, although I have studied, quote unquote, aromatherapy in just a more chemistry aromatherapy way, or working with specifically essential oils. But to me, it all falls under the guise of herbalism.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know when I give somebody a tincture or whatever it is, a topical in the clinic that I work in, the first thing they do is they open it up and they smell it.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
That's the introduction.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, honestly, for me, they're kind of a lot the same too. Mm-hmm. I have to admit that one of the reasons that I felt really strongly that I wanted to cover this topic with you is because as I was looking through plant songs, I was noticing how many scents there are in there. And the one that you have, the book is grouped into 4 sections. And the adolescence section, where you cover 4 different herbs, the scents of those herbs are just like powerful in my mind as I'm looking at them. Mm-hmm. Honeysuckle, tea, tobacco, and cannabis. Mm. And they're just like, they're such sharp contrast to each other, which is that's adolescence. I mean, that sums it up, right? I mean,
yes. And also adolescence is when you go through such a huge period of profound change. Excuse me. And that's what those aromatic, well, not just those aromatic, but all aromatic plants are about, eliciting some pretty profound, big changes in your life, at least from my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, they definitely are. A lot of them are, yeah.
So honeysuckle, I think, is the one that people would think of as being the softest scent of those four.
I would say
no.
Well, I think I would say, because people probably think that because the plant, the flower is so delicate, right? Because you remember touching honeysuckle, and if you didn't do everything perfectly, it kind of just fell apart in your hands.
Right.
But on those hot, sticky, sweaty southern days, that was one of those smells like magnolia that permeated.
Right.
To the point of being nauseating almost.
Right, super sweet.
If it was just too sweet, or if it was on that verge of, almost like dying. So it would be, so you get that putridness. So to me, I would say tea would be the most subtle of those.
The softest.
In terms of like of aromatherapy. But it elicits such hardiness in our head, right? Because tea plants are like hardy plants. And honeysuckle is so delicate, although it's like this noxious weed that would cover the earth if it were allowed to.
Yep, that's for sure.
Yeah, for me, tea is one of the ones. I have many, many different teas, all, tea plant, but oolongs and blacks. And the one that in particular is one of my comfort teas is genmaicha, which is the green tea with the little brown, roasted brown rice in it. And I can tell when I'm thinking I want that tea, I want the comfort of that tea, but I open the tin and I always smell it first. And it smells different on the days when it's actually the right tea for me. And then there's a sharpness to it on the days where I'm like, no, I better not drink it. It won't be satisfying. I won't feel good afterwards. It will be bad. And it's the aroma is what tells me the difference.
Yep. I love that. And that used to be my favorite tea. And the last couple of years, I have I probably have too much of it right now, because I bought like a pound of it. And then for some reason, I can't drink it right now. I don't know what it is, but it is so nourishing.
It is, yeah. But I think it can be overwhelming to the stomach, to be honest. I kind of think that might be what it is. I'm not sure, because I'm not an acupuncturist, and I'm not as good at, Chinese medicinal theory, but that's what I've been lately thinking is that's the difference. When it has that sharpness, it makes my stomach upset.
What if you add it to steamed rice or something like that?
Pour tea and steamed rice?
No, make it as your broth base.
Yeah. Like add it as, because that's a lot of vitamin B and whatever. You could add some other thing. Well, she's looking at me like I just came out of crazy land or something. Just leave me a postcard.
It's gonna come blopping out of my teapot. That's gonna be weird.
Yeah. Well, some kind of so the rice would settle your stomach a bit. It's still good. I don't know.
Okay. I don't know.
I'll start shutting up anytime now.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
I'm like, no.
Oh, well, what is that something that when you're working with clients, do you have them smell different teas or different aromas and see how they react to it? First?
I do that more on a subtle level. Sometimes I will just straight up, especially if it's like a trauma client, I will just ask them, are there any smells or any taste or any herbs that we have to stay away from? There are just people who are like, no lavender. And I'm like, okay, that's really helpful information for me, because then I can know that, okay, maybe it's this entire plant family that they don't like, or if they just say it's like a specific memory, it's like, okay, well, if I can't use, lavender, well, maybe I can use rose. And they don't have the exact same qualities, but at least I get some floral medicine that's, will calm down their anxiety and their nervous system without going for something that I know they don't like. And then if they're not really like a trauma client and they're like, I don't like this, I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to add a little of this because I think you actually need it, but there's like a resistance to healing. With a trauma client, resistance to healing, you don't move past that. You really go at their pace. But for somebody else where it's like, no, I know we can move you on a little bit further. We just need to make you a little bit uncomfortable. With that healing, we need a little, it can't all be, I always say it can't all be sunshine and rainbows. It has to be, there's a little push that's given. So sometimes I will give them something that they don't particularly like. Yeah. Because I think that is going to elicit a change in them.
Yeah, I've used that, especially with bitter herbs. People don't like bitter herbs and tea blends, and
you're just like, well, that's good to hear that opinion.
Yeah,
this is going to be a little tricky as you use it, isn't it?
Yeah, I bet it'll make you angry
or uncomfortable, or some other emotion. Emotion will happen. Well, that'll be something to think about.
So what is the first thing that you're thinking of when you start thinking in terms of formulation for any particular condition as you're working with, especially the aromatherapy piece of it?
So I always still go back to the basics of Chinese medicine. Even though Western herbalism was my first love and my first knowledge of plants at this point, I love the foundations of Chinese medicine. I think they just have such a sophisticated way of diagnosis and working with constitution that I go down my Chinese medicine list of, what's their constitution? Do we need things that are cooling or heating? And then I'll work with the elements, what season is it in, or what do I find is an element that is the most out of balance for them? Because we're all five, all of us have all elements within us, but which one do we need to balance so we can support another one? That's really how I work with all herbalism, including aromatherapy. And then I will try to make sure it's going to smell okay. But even again, sometimes things that don't smell good are still what we need, and it's medicine. Yeah. But from an aromatherapy standpoint, I try to make it, smell better than I would like a Chinese herbal tea that may just taste awful regardless.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of them can be pretty. There's a reason why they invented tea pills.
True.
But although I try to deter my clients from the pills, and it could just be my own bias because I'm not a pill taker, but I definitely am I try to encourage, because in Chinese medicine, we need to smell the herbs and taste the herbs because it's the taste that gives its therapeutic action.
Yeah. And there's a certain amount of healing that happens just by making the tea yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
So but you get pretty good compliance with that. Do you think that the aromatherapy part of it, you get more compliance than taking a tea internally?
To be honest, I don't think so. I think that, there's a couple things is, one, people really like to take their medicine, to physically take their medicine, whether it's in a pill or a tea or a tincture. I think that act of actually taking something, people will be more compliant with than spritz yourself with this aromatherapy spray or put these drops into your diffuser, because I don't give people internal essential oils to take. That's just not how I practice.
Yep.
And I definitely really try to educate people against that if at all possible, and be like, why don't you just drink the tea instead of thinking you need to drink the essential oil? And so I think there's more compliance because people think they're doing something more if they literally take it internally.
Instead of breathing it in internally.
Exactly. Because breathing it in internally, it elicits change. And I think there's a portion of people who are going to be compliant with whatever you give them. And then there's that piece of okay, well, which one do I think is helping me more? I think taking it internally is helping me more. And then I'm like, okay, we're giving you tinctures then. And I'll still give you your aromatherapy roll-on, and you can use it as perfume or whatever,
Yeah.
Well, it could be that it's because there's so many things with a tea. It is, like you said, aromatherapy, and it is the taste and the temperature, and there's a whole bunch of different sensations going on, so it feels more immersive for the patient.
Exactly. Yes, that's a great word.
Do you find that there are any types of patients or clients that are going more likely to respond well to the aromatherapy as opposed to taking anything or making any dietary changes? Or so I'm thinking,
go ahead.
I would think maybe either folks who are so set in their ways they're just not going to change no matter what, but more likely people who have been through some type of trauma. They may be, especially if the trauma had to do with like a PTSD kind of thing. They might be more likely to say, no, I'm afraid. I don't want to try taking things in that way.
Yep, and that's what I was going to say. Is it was the clients I've had with the most trauma, because I'm going to say, especially because I worked with the VA, and so a lot of them were on medications with the VA. And just to be clear, I worked through the VA only with pain clients. They had to have a diagnosis of pain to be treated through the VA.
And that's
but
acupuncture,
so many
right?
of them with acupuncture, but so many of them had PTS from other things, related. And so even though I was treating pain, it's not like we never talked about the trauma. That was always at least in the treatment somehow. And so most of them wouldn't take any herbs or couldn't take any herbs because financially they couldn't afford it, or the VA was like, just scared, fear factor of not taking herbs with their drugs that they took. And so with them, it was all aromatherapy. I mean, they may drink a cup of herbal tea when they walked in the door or after their session, but really their medicine was the incense I would burn or the diffuser I would have going in my office to just get them in a relaxed state before we did have the treatment. And so for them, definitely the aromatherapy was doing all sorts of medicine and magic that they weren't even aware of. And some of them were, because they'd walk in and they would be like, the smell of this place is like, this is home. I smell this and this is relaxing. And I'm like, yes, that's what it's supposed to be doing. And then also the people who are like meditators, they responded amazingly well to the aromatherapy. It was like they didn't even need a treatment. Yeah. Because they already are so used to going into those subtle spaces of energy that I think like the more you're open to subtle energy, the more the aromatherapy has a noticeable, profound effect. Because there's a profound effect happening, but it's happening so subtly. If you're not paying attention, you don't know it's happening. But the meditators and the yogi, the true yogis, they would be like, oh, you're burning this again today. Oh, or this is happening. They would immediately tap into the aromatherapy that was just being subtly displaced through the space.
Yeah, I work in a free clinic, and so most of our people are well under the poverty line, and there's a lot of, particularly women, that have come in and they want an essential oil or some kind of blend, like a spritzer like you have, to bring with them, because the smell of the result of the poverty that they live in, whether that's a unhoused camp or, whatever their situation is, it inspires so much despair with them that's hard for them to heal. So that population that asks for it, the bringing that smell of healing, whether lavender or, fill in the blank. Some people like the mint, that is part of their step away from the place that was injuring them, and continues to inspire them, like, okay, I'm gonna be okay. And just smelling a different smell is definitely a part of their healing process.
Absolutely. And it goes to the deepest part of our like cellular memory, is that aroma. Mm-hmm. And so when people are like, aromatherapy is like quackery, I'm like, maybe the way they're educating about essential oils is quackery, but aromatherapy is full on like one of the oldest forms of medicine we've had as human beings. Yeah, is aromatherapy.
Yep. And and you're right, it has been poorly used, but the the truth is that it is chemistry, and it enters our bodies. So just because it goes through the nose doesn't mean that it doesn't help. So,
Yeah.
but we're learning. We're learning.
Well,
Slow curve.
One of the things I found fascinating about cannabis, for instance, is that the smell of cannabis is somewhat irrelevant to the cannabinoids, the nature of the high that you're going to get or not get, or, the CBD and the THC elements. They don't have a scent that's volatile.
Mm-hmm.
So you talk to folks in our town who are very
Eugene,
comfortable.
Oregon.
Yeah, we've got a lot of cannabis around, and people have all these opinions on, the only good ones are the ones that smell like diesel, or only the good ones are, and they have all these opinions based on the smell. And I'm just looking at them thinking, well, we could breed the same smell into pretty much any array of THC and CBD.
Mm-hmm.
That's what cannabis growers are doing to some extent. The scent is not connected with the same, it's not the same. And you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And
but they're not going to. Go ahead.
I would say I hear that for sure, but like I think what the big thing that a bunch of the cannabis people are missing right now is that it is the terpenes that they're smelling. And as we know, right, terpenes have medicinal and therapeutic effects. So what they're saying is just the CBD and THC is actually the terpenes. So they are getting a medicinal effect or, a therapeutic effect from the aroma, but they're not understanding the fact that like it's the terpene profile with the cannabinoid profile that elicits the effect that they're having. So they can like lie and say they have 30% THC, and that's what people think is they're feeling, but they're feeling all the cannabinoids we haven't even named yet because we haven't even discovered them. And then this whole line of terpenes.
Yeah.
So I would love to see these dispensaries, and like the dispensary that I will have, we're going to go by terpene profile and cannabinoids, because just to say it's the THC and the CBD is that's not completely true. It's only part of the story.
Yeah, and I think when you start looking at the difference between recreational use and medical use, or the intention, not necessarily whether you've got a card versus don't have a card, but the intention of use, you get the people that are all about recreational, they just care about THC. That's all they care about.
Yeah.
But the ones who are interested in medical, they're beginning, I think, to start. I mean, I think the education's beginning there.
It is beginning there, but what really needs to happen is people need to actually train their bud tenders and don't just have some random person off the street who's like, oh, you want an indica or a sativa? It's like we have to elevate the conversation, especially in those medical spaces, maybe not in a recreational dispensary because that's not its place. Its place is just to sell something for recreation. But at least on the medical side, these bud tenders should actually be trained in terpene profiles and what the cannabinoids actually do, and not just be like, oh, this is the highest one in THC, you should pick this one.
Right.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that the recreational ones should also be trained, because there are an awful lot of folks, at least in our town, where recreational is the primary access. There's a lot of folks here who are using it medicinally. They go in to the recreational place to get their cannabis because it's easier. They don't need a card. There's not as much. There's a lot of reasons that just make it easier. I think the recreational tenders should also be trained in that. I think it would be
absolutely
wise. Yeah,
I agree, and that is one of my biggest beefs. If I walk into a dispensary and I basically am like, you can't. I mean, I don't say it like this, but I'm like, you can't talk to me because you don't want to hear what I have to say when you ask me if I want indica. I usually just say that doesn't matter to me. Is basically what I say. Is that doesn't matter to me.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, yeah, that what you're calling sour diesel, that's not really sour diesel.
Yep. Well, that's the fun of people learning chemistry is they'll get familiar with one particular chemical and get all excited about that, and some of those those times when you're first getting into it. You're like, well, that's the thing. That's the one chemical. That's one of the many. And plants are different.
I'm excited that people actually care about plant constituent right now. It's like, oh, they actually care about a constituent. Sure, it's only one.
It's a start.
They care about it.
It's a start. We're learning about these plants as well. And we have this thing called the Herbal Nerd Society, and one of the things that I have to, I've chosen to focus on is, like this time we're talking about Balm of Gilead. Last spring. Yeah, in April we're talking. We were talking about Balm of Gilead, and it was so hard to pick one chemical to focus on to introduce the readers to, because so many of the chemicals in the poplar tree are antimicrobial. So I'm just looking at which one. I don't even know which one. I have to pick one. And I'm not trying to say this is the only one that works. This is even the primary. This is just one of the myriad. The reason why this plant works so well is because it has a myriad. But it's just a wealth of choices. And I run into that with plant after plant after plant. It's like, I'm just going to pick one because I don't want to overwhelm people. If they can just learn one chemical at a time, or, one process at a time, that's the way I learned.
Right.
But there's just so much to choose.
So many, yeah.
But it's definitely better to start simple, right? Because most people don't deal well with being overwhelmed with just facts, and then they feel inadequate because they didn't know half of what you were talking about.
Right.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, well, I guess that's how you went through your book, Plant Songs, is one plant at a time, and digging into that and then adding your story to it. And I suspect that's also what you're doing in your videos and your blog and podcast, is just kind of spoon-sized helpings of herbal healing for people.
That's exactly right. Except for one thing I didn't mention about those videos is I do have 3 webinars for acupuncturists who need CEUs.
Oh, nice.
So those tend to be a little bit more geared towards practitioners because they already understand some of the language. But each of those videos I've broken down on YouTube into like 1 minute to 3 minute chunks. So even if you don't want to get all the information that's not relevant, you can just pick a 3-minute video on rose.
Oh, okay. Is that?
I was going to ask you.
Made it easier.
Yeah, I was going to ask you: is rose one of your favorite aromatherapy essential oils?
It is one of my favorites, but more than not, I'll use rose geranium just because rose is so expensive.
Yes.
I've been using rose a lot lately, only because I got a lot of free samples of different roses.
Nice.
So it's been great because I've been able to be like, oh, this one has more of this quality. And I don't break it down by chemical constituents or anything in my mind, but I just feel like the subtle differences of aroma for what I feel is necessary for either myself or that person in the moment. So that's been really fun. But I just, in my day-to-day life, I'll pretty much use rose geranium because it's just more affordable.
It is much more affordable.
But I love rose. I will, for me, aromatherapy of just smelling a fresh flower is as important as buying that, or more important than having the essential oil, because then you have some connection to a living being in its full form, as opposed to a concentrated product of a plant that or thousands of plants that you've never seen.
Right. Yeah. I think I have to say that one of the things I found personally most disappointing is when I'll see like in the rose gardens, you're there, the scent of rose is strong. You see a beautiful rose, you go up to it, and this one happens to be one of the hybrids without scent.
Right.
It's so disappointing.
It is. And it's like, yes, you're beautiful, but there's more. And that's just, I feel like that's the epitome of our shallow culture right now, right? Yeah. Like beautiful, but you get in there and you're like, oh, there's no substance to that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. There's a healing part of that. There's healing and beauty, but there's complex. I think that's a key to our conversation right now. So you were talking a little bit about your webinars. Those are available on your website. People can sign up for those.
Yes, those are available on my website, and anyone can buy them, but they're really for acupuncturists who need CEUs.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Okay. So how are people getting a hold of you then? You have websites, you have Facebook,
Yes, I have my website, bakerbotanica.com. Facebook, I'm Jessica Baker, LAC. And Instagram, Baker_Botanica. Those are the best ways to find me and get in touch with me.
Okay. All right.
And where can they find Plant Songs?
Plant Songs you can find on my website, but you can also get it off of Amazon, and then you could be on Prime, so you can get it in 2 days, as opposed to if you ordered it from my website, it comes from Balboa Press, and it may take a week or two to get to you. And there's also a Kindle version, so if you have like the free unlimited Kindle, I think you can read my Kindle version for free, which is kind of cool. And one thing we didn't talk about last time either is I do have a 5-element essential oil line out that you can also get on Amazon.
I like that. I like
so
that.
Baker, if you just Google Baker Botanica essential oil or put it in the search bar on Amazon, Baker Botanica essential oils, you can buy all 5 or you can buy each one individually.
Nice. So it sounds like people have lots of different options. Yeah. Well, thank you very, very much for being with us today and sharing your wisdom on aromatherapy. And it's really been inspiring to have you. I appreciate you returning. And also, we're very grateful here that you shared your book with us because it really touched both Candace and I. So we ask you, please do not let this book be the end of it. Keep going.
Thank you.
Keep going.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes, it's definitely not the end. I will keep going. I really appreciate both you, Sue, and Candace for your support. That really means a lot. So thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Well,
as always,
put an herb on it.
The statements made about herbs and products on this podcast have not been evaluated by the United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent disease. All information provided on this podcast or any affiliated websites is for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for advice from your physician or other healthcare professional. You should not use the information on this podcast and its affiliated websites for a diagnosis or treatment of any health problem. Always consult with a healthcare professional before starting any new vitamins, supplements, diet, or exercise program before taking any medication, or if you have or suspect you might have a health problem. Any testimonials, questions, or case studies are based on individual results and do not constitute a guarantee that you will achieve the same results.